Hello and thank you for watching the Angry Rooster Creations channel. Today we are taking a look at another fountain pen ink. In this video we're looking at Noodler's Baystate Concord Grape. I will be doing my writing tests using this Jinhao 619 or 777 fountain pen with an extra fine nib. Now, I'd like to preface that I mostly use my pens and my inks for art purposes, so the papers I'm going to be testing on in this video are not necessarily the papers that possibly most people would want to see fountain pens being used on, because they are art and drawing papers rather than the typical journaling papers that a lot of people use, that being Rhodia, Tomoe River, Clairefontaine, Moleskine, etc. The papers that I'm going to be using in this test today are two controls, those being 20-pound copy paper and a composition notebook. And then the other three papers I'm going to be testing on are Blick 50-pound white sulfite drawing paper, Koh-i-Noor 50-pound sketch paper, and a Canson 98-pound mixed media paper. So, without further ado, I'm going to get on to those writing samples. Alright, our first writing test is going to be done on this Pen Gear 20-pound copy paper. This is the cheapest ream of copy paper that is available at my local Walmart. Alright, so here is the Baystate Concord Grape on the 20-pound paper. There does appear to be some feathering here. I would not say it's terrible, but in some of the, like right there in grape, I don't know how well it's going to show up, it's pretty significant. And at where the pen strokes ended, there's a little bit of a blot and some feather. But considering that this is a 20-pound copy paper, it's definitely not the worst. Now, once again, this is with an extra fine nib, so I would expect that if you were using a really wet medium or wet broad, you would probably see, you might see some more feathering. Now, the smear test, I did a 10-second smear and I did a scrub smear, and I think there's some slight smearing in that scrub smear, but I really couldn't get this to smear. What I'm writing in is not necessarily the wettest pen. So I think a combination of it wicking into the paper fairly quickly and it not being the wettest of pens is to contribute to that. Now on the back here you will see we definitely had bleed on the back of this paper, and there is some it ghosted pretty good, but you can see in several spots that there was a pretty significant bleed through on this paper. So could you write on 20-pound copy paper with this ink? Yes, but it's not the best ink for that purpose, and if you are going to do so, it probably needs to be on something where you're not using or otherwise do not need the back of that page. Alright, with that we're going to move on to the composition notebook. And now we have the writing test in the Pen Gear composition notebook. Alright, so yeah, it feathered pretty significantly on this composition paper, which is not really surprising. Actually, in fact, compared to some of the other inks, like the Polar inks that I've tested, it seems to be about similar to how the Polar Brown fared on this paper. Now, I did get a slight, maybe a slight smear at the last hash mark there on the 10-second smear, and I did get the scrub to smear a little bit, so it didn't necessarily just immediately wick into the paper. And on the back side here, looks like I might have a few little purple dots. I don't know if that's going to show up where the scrub bled through, but actually, despite the fact that it feathered kind of bit, mostly what I see on the back here is just ghosting. Except for that scrub, there's really not any actual bleed spots. I mean, there's a couple darker spots where it ghosted pretty hard, but I wouldn't really call those bleed. That purple hasn't really made it all the way through to the back, just in the scrub. So while I would say this is not the best performing ink, at least it works, it's legible. It's not the prettiest. I wouldn't necessarily choose to use this ink in a composition notebook like this. But I would say if you were in the position to be using this in a composition notebook, you could actually write on both sides of the page with this ink in a composition notebook like this one. So that concludes the composition notebook. Our next paper is going to be the Blick 50-pound drawing paper. And now we're going to do the writing test on the Blick 50-pound drawing paper. Alright. Now this here, it appears to have worked pretty good. Now I'm very, very, very close. And look, there is some pretty fine feathering. I don't even know if it's going to come out. I mean, I have to get really close to the paper to see it. Maybe a little bit, oops, sorry. Out of frame. I don't know if that's going to show up, but on the that cursive nib there, at the very end of the B, I don't know if that's going to show up. I mean, it's barely there. Barely feathering. It is working quite well on this paper. As far as the smear, it looks like it started to smear at the 8th hash mark. No, excuse me, the 9th hash mark there, so that's about pretty much dry in about 2 seconds on this paper. And I did get a little bit of a smear on the scrub. Not a whole lot. On the back, there's really no ghosting or anything. Maybe ghosts a little bit right there where the scrub is, but you can't really hardly tell that was on this paper. Now looking in person, I can barely see anything, but this is a 50-pound paper, so you shouldn't expect to see a whole lot of bleed. So the most egregious so far on this paper has been the Polar Green and the Polar Brown, and then next after that would be the Bad Blue Heron that I tested. But all in all, on this paper, it behaves fairly well. I don't see any problems using it on a paper like this. Now this paper, while it is more resilient than the copy paper and the notebook paper, as far as art papers go, this white sulfite paper I think is a little bit more tailored towards a dry media. So it is a bit more absorbent with wet media like inks and things. So it's not necessarily the best surface or the best paper for those types of media, but it seems to be handling it just fine with this ink. Alright, our next paper is going to be the Koh-i-Noor sketch paper. And now we're going to do the writing test on the Koh-i-Noor sketch paper. Alright. Now, on this paper, it seems to, it works fine. This sketch paper here, this Koh-i-Noor sketch paper is not an absorbent paper at all. It really isn't. This, I've never have so far with all the inks I've tested, I've not really had any kind of feather issues. Excuse me. I have not really had any kind of feather issues or any kind of bleed issues really with any ink that I've used on this paper. It is pretty resilient to ink. Now, I don't know how things are going to come through on the screen here. If the lines don't look exactly crisp, if they look like they may have feathered edges, in this case, they shouldn't come across that way, but there are not. It's not that it's feathering. This is a toothy paper or a textured paper. It's got kind of a bit of a rougher surface. And as such, sometimes, just due to the way that the ink and the nib reacts to that textured surface, it can cause the lines to not necessarily be the most crisp. Now, if you look on our 10-second smear with this paper, at where the pen strokes ended, I was doing upstrokes. All 10 pen strokes there did smear at the top, and the scrub also smeared pretty decently, and that's to be expected with this paper not really absorbing the ink immediately. And I will say this, as I'm holding this up to the light, under the light, getting really close, this is the first time I might be seeing any kind of a shading. The thing is, the Concord Grape is such a rich, dark purple that it's very hard to perceive shading. As I'm holding it up here real close to the light and looking at it very close, I can see some, but in a practical everyday use case, at least on this paper, I don't know that you would actually notice it. And certainly on the last two, the way they just absorb, or the last few papers being more absorbent, the way they absorbed the ink, there was pretty much an even hue throughout. So on this paper or a paper similar that is a bit more resistant to that sucking in of the ink, this ink should hold up just fine. Alright, and as far as on the back, there is not any kind of bleed through or even any kind of ghosting on the back here. Maybe a slight ghost here where the scrub is, and that's it. Now, I've said this in other videos. This Koh-i-Noor paper is a 50-pound paper. However, this is one of the thinnest 50-pound papers I've ever used. That 50 pounds has to do with the formulation here. It's not necessarily a direct relation to the thickness of the paper itself, because this paper feels quite a bit like parchment paper. But because it's not a very absorbent paper, it's not really prone to lots of bleeding and ghosting on the back side. Alright, and our last paper is going to be the Canson 98-pound mixed media paper. Alright, and here is now our last test. This is going to be the Canson 98-pound mixed media paper. Alright. Now, there is no real issue here on this paper, and I did not expect this to have any kind of issue with this paper. So far, and what I've been testing, this has repeatedly been the best paper for every ink that I have tried on it. Mixed media papers are papers that are designed for multiple different types of art media, both wet and dry. They're designed really to be kind of the best of all, or not necessarily the best of all, but sort of a jack of all trades paper that you can do just about anything on with reasonable success. And that includes things like ink, acrylics, and watercolors, dry media. And as far as inks, I mean, that's inks like this, shellac-based inks, so your India inks, alcohol inks from either liquid inks or markers. And as you can see here, it works just fine. There is no kind of bleed, no kind of feather, none of any of the anything you wouldn't want to see. It's about the best possible consistently, this paper has been about the best ideal results that you would want to see with any ink that I put on it so far. There, once again, under the light, real close up here under the light, real close to my eyes, I can see a slight bit of shade. Like, I almost want to feel like in some parts of the letters, it maybe wants to tend towards a maybe even lighter, almost a little bit of a pink hue, but because this is such a dark purple in general, it's quite hard to see it. I mean, the color, when it calls this Concord Grape, I mean, yeah, something like think of a glass of grape juice is a pretty, that's probably a pretty good idea of the general hue of this. It is a pretty dark purple. I'm trying to think of anything off the top of my head to use as a visible color reference. Right off the top of my head, I can't really think of anything else than, say, like grape juice or grape jelly. It's about that same color. It's a pretty dark, but it's not so dark purple it's almost black. It's clearly a purple. You can look at it and tell it is a purple, but it is a pretty dark purple. And as far as the back, there's not going to be anything. I knew there wasn't going to be anything. Even the most aggressive inks that I've tested, some of the polar inks, do not show through this. This 98-pound paper is about the thickness and stiffness of a piece of cardstock. So you should not, with this particular paper, there should be no expectation that there's going to be a bleed through. With that being done, that concludes the writing test. I'm going to do a real quick water resistance test. Okay, now real quickly, before I get to the water resistance test and my final thoughts here, I am going to show this poor man's chromatography that I did here. So this is the chromatography we have at home. It is not the ideal way to do it, but it is a way to do it. This is a paper towel. I put a line of ink on this paper towel, and then I dipped this ink into a mixture of 70% isopropyl alcohol and water, mixed at roughly about 1/3 alcohol to water solution. And as you can see, this is a lot of the inks I've tested so far have been pretty much monochromatic in their chromatographies. But you can see the Baystate is one that actually has multiple chromatic colors in it. So down here at the bottom where the initial line is, I don't know how this is going to appear color-wise on the camera, but down here it's blue. There is a what hue of blue? Not lighter than navy blue, almost a royal blue kind of look here at the very bottom. You come up from that, and there's this sort of band that's sort of making its way up that is purple. And then obviously you can see going up the top that you have this magenta hue. Now, like I said, when I was getting the faintest hints, looking real close, like there could have been some shading, I feel like it had maybe a slight pinkish cast, but like I said, it was so imperceptible, and I had to be almost right on the paper in direct view. I have a little ring light here that's around the lens of the camera, that functionally it's almost like it didn't shade at all. I'm not sure if with a different nib combo, whether that be like a flex nib or maybe a broad nib or an italic nib, if maybe you would see shading with this ink. I don't really have any of those nibs to use because the way I draw, I mostly use fines and extra fines. You know, there is technically a possibility that you could get some of that based on looking at the chromatography here. Now, I know obviously this is not a perfect chromatography. If you used a more proper filter paper, you might actually see more in it, but you know, it's what I had to work with, so it's what I did. So whether or not this is helpful to anyone, you know, it's for you to decide. but for what it's worth, here's that poor man's chromatography. Now for our last test here, I'm going to do a real quick water test. This is a little scrap of 20-pound copy paper. I'm going to draw a grid on here. I'm going to wait 30 seconds, and then I'm going to take a pipette. I'll drip some water on the grid, wait another 10 seconds. I'm going to rub the water in and then dab the water off with a tissue and see if I get any ink to lift, and then see if any ink moves on the paper. All right. All right. So as you can see, this did move on the paper some. Okay, now what it appears happened here is that, I'm going to bring the chromatography back out. It appears that from looking at the tissue here and what I can see on the paper where it has bled out, it appears that whatever the pink dye or pink pigment component of this ink is water soluble. And that is what appears to have moved around, but it seems like that darker purple, or the potentially whatever that blue, that kind of royal blue color is there, it still looks purple on the paper, but now there's like a pink magenta halo around, I don't know how well that's going to show up, around the ink lines. And if you even look on the paper towel here, you can see the grid, and it's pink where it lifted that pink. So it seems that perhaps part of the component of this ink is permanent. Now obviously this is not the most exhaustive water test. It is a quick water test, but it looks like even if you soak this down, some of the ink is still going to stay on the paper, but parts of it, being that pink, would move. But it strangely looks like, no, it did get lighter. Of course, it's still wet, but you can see the Noodlers there, the Concord, and you can actually see, I don't know if it's just going to show on the camera, but in person, it did absolutely lighten. It changed the hue here. So it's not that same dark purple color anymore. So this is actually quite interesting. Now, I'm going to say this. One of the things I have going on is I'm going to do a running test, and now that I've got a long running test I'm wanting to do with all the inks that I've tested so far. So with these art papers, I am planning on taking these papers that have all the inks that are on these papers and taping them in a window on the south side of my house. This being about halfway through the month of March, still technically in the winter season. Winter summer season, or winter spring season, excuse me, kind of change. Most of the sun is still favoring towards the south right now, so the south side of my house is in full view of the sun right now, as long as it's not cloudy and overcast. And so I'm going to take these papers. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do all of them. I might try to do all of them. The Blick, the Koh-i-Noor, and maybe even the Canson. And I'm going to tape them in that window and leave them there for a full month, and with direct sunlight exposure to do a light fastness test on the inks that I have on here. So that is an upcoming video that can be looked forward to. I mean, it's obviously going to be a month after me making this video. But that will be the true final test for both this ink and the other inks that I've tested so far. Now, as far as the Concord Grape goes, like I said, I like the dark purple hue of this ink. Now, one thing to note about these, and it's written on here, with these Baystate inks, they are not technically pH neutral. I believe they're slightly basic, and you're supposed to make sure that when you put the Baystate inks in a pen, that the pen is completely clean, and you make sure you're not mixing it with any other inks, because I believe if you have like ink residue from other inks and you mix in the Baystate inks, they can kind of congeal or something. There's a funny reaction that can happen with Baystate inks and other inks. Now, as far as I know, that's like the entire Baystate line, both Baystate Blue being the really well-known one in the line, this one, and I think there's Baystate Concord Brim, and a couple others off the top of my head that I don't remember. And that is on the label right here. I guess you could pause the video and read that if you wished. But, you know, it has some properties to it that are kind of unique to it. Like I said, I tried a sample bottle of this, and I liked it enough that I decided I wanted, or a little sample vial, and I decided I actually wanted to have some of this. You know, like I showed in this video, with the copy paper and the notebook paper I used, it may not be the best ink for all papers, but it's fairly well behaved, all things considered. I didn't see anything super egregious on this one. It's not a super aggressive, bleeds like crazy, feathers real bad. I would say it seems to perform on par as far as writing with a lot of inks, how you could sort of expect them to write. With that having all been said, that's been my kind of test and review of the Noodler's Baystate ink. I hope that it was helpful to whoever may have watched it. If you got any useful information from this, I would really appreciate a thumbs up and if you have any suggestions, any questions, any comments, criticisms, all the things are helpful. Or, you know, or if I can maybe help you with some more information on this, you know, shoot it down and drop it down there in the comment section below. All that engagement is helpful, helps me to make better videos and you know, learn from whoever's watching my videos. And if you've seen this video and you've seen some of the other videos, and maybe, you know, at this point in time, you might be watching this at a point in time when the light fastness test is already out. You can watch it like immediately after this, or maybe you watched it before. If those are things that you thought were you know, helpful, informative, and you would like to see maybe more content like this and other things, I'm not just going to be doing pen stuff on my channel. You know, I would really appreciate a subscription. It would help me out a lot. And so with all that, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.